written a little bit about sort of affirmative action and the Harvard Asian case that's the Supreme Court is taking. Um, do you have a feeling? Do you have a good feeling? I have my own sort of opinion on this. Do you have a good feeling on like if the Supreme Court is going to actually get rid of affirmative action in this case or not, or do you not? Would you not speculate on that?
Um, I'm certainly no expert on the Supreme Court, but just to advertise my own podcast, I think in about a week and a half we're going to release an interview I did with a guy called Rick Sander, who's a professor at UCLA Law School, and he's the guy who coined the term mismatch. So he's both a scholar at a law school, but also a PhD economist, an econometrician who has studied affirmative action in great detail. And he told me that the way that they timed the granting cert, oh, you've got a legal background, so you know more about this than I do, but the way the Supreme Court timed the granting of cert to hear this case, he claims suggests they are probably going to do something. And he also claimed that these cases, obviously they're in the air. They know what's coming down the pipe. So the
Yeah.
clerks and the justices have been discussing this. Say the conservative bloc, for example, has been discussing this for some time. So they kind of know what they want to do. And so he thinks there's a good chance there could be a significant change in the status of affirmative action as a result of this case reaching
Yeah,
SCOTUS.
it's fascinating because you're always in the Supreme Court, like to know what they're doing. You're analyzing the psychology of like two or three individuals, so it's hard to make predictions. Like how the Alito and Clarence Thomas are going to vote, and how the
Yeah.
three liberals are going to vote, and so it's like and then the other four, you sort of have to sort of psychoanalyze them and look at their history and try to figure it out. And so that it's fraught
Yeah.
to do that because people can have
I,
idiosyncrasies.
I'm not any I'm not any good at predicting what SCOTUS is going to do. In fact, I'm often shocked at how stupid they are, honestly. Or let me put it another way. That's not the right way to put it. But the extent to which law is not at all anything like the axiom, the logical reasoning based on axioms that they might tell you it when you're in a 1L, but after that you figure out it's not
Yeah,
true.
I have professors who do believe in the X. I mean, I had professors who you could tell they thought there was an objective answer to these things, like, cruel and unusual punishment. Like I remember, I was telling a professor, like, this is all just you're playing with words. You're just sort of getting to the political
Yeah,
result you want.
subjective word
Yeah,
games.
and so so it's like he was telling me, oh, cruel and unusual punishment was not, the death penalty might not have been cruel and unusual punishment at the founding, because there were no prisons, right? So you needed like a way to enforce the law, and now there are prisons, so now we can say, that the death penalty is cruel and unusual punishment. Like you're just making things up. Like what does it mean cruel and unusual? These are words. They had meanings like at
The
the beginning, but then if you start saying, well, the meanings can change with historical sense, it's opened up to doing whatever you want. And if you look at like the wording of the Civil Rights Act versus what courts have done with it, I mean, it's the most Orwellian thing you can imagine. I mean, like the conservatives in dissent in the affirmative action cases have made this analogy. They've said, Rehnquist in one of his dissents said, this it's Orwellian because it says don't discriminate based on race. The government has used it to basically say you not only can discriminate based on race, you have to discriminate based on race. You have to have an affirmative action program and keep track of which groups, and then have disparate impact analysis and all this stuff. So yeah, if you want to be, I mean, I've written about this in my in my Substack, and I'm writing more about it. If you want to be sort of depressed on how sort of fake it all is, and just like the sort of the, I don't know if it's like cynicism or just whether they're self-deluded or it's just dishonesty, it really is depressing, and it's depressing for anyone who thinks like society should be run on rationalist grounds, or there should be like some kind of connection between what politicians and what say they're doing and what laws say and the way the world actually works. It's sort of a very just a sobering and sort of depressing experience to look into this stuff.
Well, I concur 100% with what you just said. Specifically for the case, Asian admissions to Harvard. If you read the ruling by, I believe her name is Burroughs, Judge Burroughs, the federal judge in Boston, on the case, she literally, she's clearly statistically enumerate. So she for example, she weighs in on the issue of racial balancing because the plaintiffs had charged that had asserted that Harvard was clearly using racial balancing. So if you look in a given year, if they because their yields fluctuate, right? So if they get an exceptionally large African American class, then the subsequent years they can take smaller African American classes, and if they get too much yield among Asians, they really push down on the Asians in the subsequent. So they managed to maintain this time average thing, which is just exquisitely constant over time. And you can see it by looking at correlations between different years, right? For different variables like number of blacks or number of Asians or whatever. And the judge says, "Oh, there's no evidence for this," and then she basically just says, "Oh, you see, the numbers for any of these years is fluctuating, so there can't be racial balancing." So like if an undergrad freshman physics major made that argument to me in my, freshman class, I would flunk them. I would say, you obviously don't understand math. Like, I don't understand how you can reason. How does A imply B the way that the judge did in the case? And then interestingly, later, if you go further into her opinion, toward the end, she literally justifies racial balancing as being okay, as being like, well, in the interest of diversity, we can conduct racial balancing. Well, why did you have to make a fallacious argument, empirical argument against the existence of racial balancing when you later say it's actually okay? It's just what I wanted to just take the whole thing and put it in a shredder.
Yeah.
Like this is the opinion of a learned intellectual. No,
Yeah.
not
Well,
really.
I mean, it's all. Yeah. I mean, this is not new. So if you go back to the Gratz and the Grutter cases, the two big affirmative action cases, just the dissents. I mean, the dissents of Scalia and maybe one or two others. I mean, they go into this. They say that like the Supreme Court said there should be no quota, and then they go and they say year after year, they're basically the numbers are matching. So if they get 12% black applicants, they're ending up 12% black. And then if they get 2% Native American, they're ending up with something approximately 2% Native American, right? And then, and what they say is they justify, diversity, and, we're not balancing. We're just we're trying to create a critical mass so we can have different groups. Oh, no, but the critical mass, they equal the balance of the applicants that you're getting in. And so, yeah, this has been sort of like a transparent sort of scam from the beginning. And I think this is so. I actually, if I have to make a prediction, I do think the Supreme Court will actually do something good here. The Voting Rights Act. I don't know if you probably don't know much about the vote. Not many people do know about the Voting Rights Act. They probably think it's the most innocent thing in the world. It just says you can't deny black people the right to vote based on their race. Yes, it says that, but it's like the Civil Rights Act. It goes much, much further. It has gerrymandering to make sure you elect radical black politicians, and if you don't do that, it's against the law. And it has things where you can't make minor changes in laws because then it will dilute black political power, and so black political power has to be maximized. It's created a completely tribal sort of system of voting, and the Supreme Court has pushed back on a lot of that in the last, I forget when, I think it was around 2013, 2014, the big voting rights case. So that indicates some kind of willingness to sort of rethink some of these crazy laws and policies that really trace back to the 1960s and how laws from the 1960s have been interpreted. And this is a more conservative Supreme Court now. So yeah, I think we're going to get a ruling that's going to make conservatives happy here. And it's going to be interesting.
But if I could just
Yeah.
jump in, the Ivy League, presidents of the Ivy League schools and such, they're very clever in their own way, and so they've in anticipation of this and taking advantage of
Yeah.
COVID, they've pretty much jettisoned standardized tests. So it's going to be harder and harder to catch them doing stuff. I mean, it took a heroic effort by the Students for Fair Admissions to get this case going, to get discovery, to discover the report written by the internal Office of Institutional Research at Harvard that found discrimination. All that is meant to be swept under the rug and undiscoverable. And the more they limit the amount of data that's used, hard numerical data that's used in admissions, i.e., by getting rid of standardized testing, the more they insulate themselves from.
What about the UC system? Because when University of California got rid of affirmative action, the numbers did change substantially. So isn't that evidence that there's some limit on how much they can sort of tinker with this stuff?
They were unprepared for that.
I see.
So what happened is, and actually, I lived through all this, and I know a lot of the people involved in this. So they were caught by surprise. There were dramatic changes. If you were a social scientist, the data generated by, was it Prop 209 in California? is a gold mine because it's a natural experiment. It was a shock to the system, and then you just saw what happened afterwards. But then gradually, the admissions office started cheating, and there are very prominent professors in the UC system that who have served on admissions committees or oversight committees who have charged that the University of California is
They
cheating.
cheat, but have they ever
And
have they ever gotten back to the what it was before?
they have
Okay,
not.
so
They
it's
have
not.
not. So it is true they've not been able to fully overcome the impact of Prop 209. But now they're trying more and more desperate measures, like basically getting rid of standardized testing
Yeah.
entirely. Right.
Are you? I mean,
So
are you up? Do you think that if they do that, do you think the value of the college degree will change, and maybe there'll be less of an advantage to going to elite school, or do you think it's like sort of like how much do you think it's because a rational economic system, right, would say, okay, Harvard, you're selecting for standardized tests, Yale, you're selecting for standardized tests, so we're going to judge you, if you're a Harvard graduate or Yale graduate, better than a state U graduate. Now, if Harvard gets rid of standardized tests because they want affirmative action and they just select people based on, the right race and whether they're left wing activists or not, an intelligent market, like a self interested market, would adjust to that and say, we're going to discount Harvard, we'll hire people from University of Iowa or something instead. But a sort of conformist model of the world of how businesses think will say no, they'll just keep relying on the same things over and over. I'm undecided on like what world we would see in that case.
I
Um,
I think you won't see uniformity. So you'll see some firms still behaving the same way because of conformity and lack of ability to reason from first principles. But some smart firms like Goldman, maybe not Goldman is the best example, but certainly individual hedge funds, for example, they've already kind of figured this out, that there are many diamonds in the rough who were locked out because they were the wrong ancestry group from, say, Harvard. And so if they look at the top kid at Michigan or the top kid at Ohio State or whatever, there are a lot of really strong kids now who are going to their state flagship instead of the top elite, the elites. So there's gradual realization, but it depends on how much the firm actually cares about looking prestigious and actually hiring the best candidate, right? Those are different
yeah,
things.
yeah. There's sure some industries like the not. I imagine the nonprofit world wants to look prestigious, right? And they don't have sort of a market.
Yeah.
They're relying on donors or whatever government grants. They don't have to be competent. They don't have to make something or meet some kind of price, some discipline of the price system. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we will get. It can make it worse. I think the problem with affirmative action, what actually I think is the worst thing, and the merit thing is important, but I think like the worst thing is that a lot of people who get in with affirmative action and like especially in hiring, they tend to be ideologically committed to a certain worldview because they sort of have to justify their place in the system. And so if like we get rid of affirmative action, but instead like we just start selecting just directly for politics, right? Because that's what like a lot of the data shows. Like they're selecting for left wing activists and these conservative extracurriculars hurt you. In that case, they'll end up crazier. Like the universities will end up even worse.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I
so
kind of have some bad news for you in the sense that even before we get to the point where meritocracy is totally destroyed, in the university system, we're well on the way in that direction, but it's certainly far from accomplished. Already there are examples you can point to, like tech companies that should care about the quality of their coders. They have internal battles about to what extent they're allowed to use sort of difficult interview questions, uh, how much diversity should count in the hiring process. Is there a right number, right fraction of hires that have to be in certain groups? And there are huge internal battles at all. It's been widely reported, huge internal battles at all of these companies, where it really does matter to those companies, like the quality of their technology staff. But clearly, they're acting in a way, I think, which hurts their competitiveness as companies because of ideological beliefs within the company.
yeah. Well, there was an interesting story actually. Yeah, that's true. I don't doubt that that's true. But there's also, the government, it comes in very strange ways. So there was a New York Times article about IBM, and they're facing a lawsuit on age discrimination because basically they want to be involved in cutting edge technologies, and all these boomers. your brain, they have not been trained in the same way, and your brain does go down with age, and they cost more. So they seemed like they were trying to make a rational business decision. If you want to be a cutting edge technology, I think you would go younger, and the government's coming after them for that. So there is like it's just a terrible system, up and down. And yeah. I mean, I think one thing about the affirmative action case, if the Supreme Court gets rid of it, I think there's a lot of the universities. The case focused on universities, it could have some broader application, and it would potentially lead to more litigation. So, like in government grants, government contracting, in government employment, like affirmative action is everywhere. And so once you start, getting rid of racial preferences in universities, it's the same thing. It's the same simple. Actually, maybe they could actually have a very broad ruling, saying the Civil Rights Act says X. That would be in their power, and they would say, everything else that justifies affirmative action uh, based on the Civil Rights Act, that's not allowed. They could do that. That would be very ambitious. I don't know if they do that. They probably would do that. They would probably have the ruling on the universities question, and then wait for other cases to get to the court, and then apply
Yeah,
it.
I kind of feel like their ruling will be limited to education, actually.
Yeah, I think that's true. But hopefully down the line, I mean, hopefully it's just like a wrecking ball to all this stuff, because it's up and down the economy in our institutions.